I've beaten Tears of the Kingdom. This game is incredible. This game is everything I wanted it to be and more. This game is a worthy sequel to Breath of the Wild. This game was worth the wait. I'm so excited to dive into this review series with you guys. I've got so much to say about this game, and I'm genuinely overwhelmed with the idea of grabbing onto this beast to start off. I'm 80 hours into it already, and somehow both feel right at home in this world and have barely come to grips with it. Look, this review is going to be in-depth. In fact, calling it a review is probably selling it short. It's part review, part analysis, part critique. And we're going no holds barred. Spoilers of all varieties are abound. Obviously, all of Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild are on the table. If you haven't played Tears of the Kingdom, go away. I'm not kidding. I'll be here and this video will be here, waiting for you to finish. We aren't talking plot spoilers today, but this world is so rich and amazing that you need to spend time exploring it yourself. It's okay to click off for now. I forgive you. Come back when you're done. Here's a list of the other games that I'll be showing visuals from and talking about. So if you're sensitive to spoilers, do keep this in mind. I won't be going into plot specifics, just visual stuff, so just listening to this should be fine if you're planning to play any of these games. Finally, if you haven't watched the Chapter 0 video of this series, you should check it out first to see how I'll be judging Tears of the Kingdom. Alright, that's settled. Let's not drag this out. There's so much to talk about, so let's get started. Hi, my name is Volcaronite, and we're kicking off the next part of our Tears of the Kingdom review series. Today, it's Chapter 1, Perfect World. What makes an open world truly great? It's a question that many games and developers have tried to answer, with results varying wildly. The difficulty comes from trying to convey messages, reason, and purpose for a world's existence. There was once a time when an open world could exist for the sake of it, and that would be enough. You don't need to go as far back as, say, the original The Legend of Zelda game for this. Though that is an early open world, one of the earliest that has been accepted by critics as both an open world and a successful game, the open world was still a novelty itself long after that. Grand Theft Auto, the original from 1997, certainly earned its acclaim in no small part due to its open-ended explorability. Though the game's contemporary reception was mixed and lukewarm, all praise of the game essentially boiled down to a single point: the gameplay of freedom. Being let loose in a digital world was compelling. It wasn't just a feature, but a reason to make a game. The Grand Theft Auto series continues to this day to hone in on that freedom, to create games and experiences largely because of that original fixation on an open world. The most recent installment in the series is the second best-selling game of all time, after Minecraft. Interestingly, Minecraft has arguably defined the gameplay of freedom over the last decade, due to it being the game with perhaps the least direction and prescribed progression ever. Until a few years ago, there wasn't even the most basic of tutorials in the game. You are dropped in a world of blocks. Do literally anything. Good luck. But Minecraft and Grand Theft Auto and The Legend of Zelda all sit on discrete ends of the spectrum of open-world games. All three are critically acclaimed, all three spawned enormous franchises with player bases in the tens, even hundreds of millions around the globe. But when you think of those games that define the open world, do you really find yourself thinking about Minecraft or Zelda? Probably not. Certainly not in the way you do when you consider Grand Theft Auto or The Witcher 3 or Skyrim. Certainly not like you do when you consider Breath of the Wild. At some point in the past 10 to 15 years or so, the concept of open world has gone from a game's single most defining element to almost unremarkable. An open world is a thing, a choice. Choosing to make a game with an open world is not all that different from choosing to make a game with voice acting or a branching path narrative. It's fundamentally crucial to some players and pretty mundane to the rest. As technology and development has advanced, those features which were once game-making ideals are now just unremarkable entries on lists of selling points. And yet, some open world games managed to break through that veneer of using open worlds as a superficial choice to create something different, something special. The Witcher 3, a popular open world game I genuinely love and have talked about a fair bit on this channel, doesn't do this. Sure, it's got an open world, and that open world is big and pretty and kind of neat to explore, but it all exists as a method of allowing Geralt to improve prove and gather strength in his story to find his charged Cirilla. Skyrim doesn't do this either. The open world in Skyrim is functionally no different from the map screen in Super Mario 3D World. It connects the points of interest in an unobtrusive way. I've made no secret of the fact that I don't much care for Skyrim, but even those who adore the game enjoy its openness as more of an abstract concept. The open world is simply a means to an end, a tool that is used to connect the places where experimentation and development happen. Okay, let's stop trashing random games and get to the point. What all of this is obviously leading to is that the open world as a feature isn't great on its own. It needs to be made great by gameplay that facilitates and utilizes the open world in ways that wouldn't be possible without it. That's where almost all of these games struggled, and where Breath of the Wild succeeded. It made its open world a crucial part of its gameplay from the fundamentals, and designed the rest of the game around that ideal. It made the open world more open than any game before. As I talked about in the first part of this series, the single aspect that makes open worlds great, in my opinion, is the joy of traversing the world. If you're playing a game that is, first and foremost, an open world, then you feeling the urge to hit the fast travel button is a failure of the game. Let's talk about why, while focusing in on Tears of the Kingdom. An open world needs to have both intrinsic and extrinsic rewards for exploring. On the extrinsic side, Tears of the Kingdom has so much stuff to see and do. It seemed, to me, like Breath of the Wild was packed with stuff to see and do around every corner. But now, after having played Tears of the Kingdom, I can see that I really had no concept of what it meant to have a world packed full. Because, see, every little ruined structure and village and monster den and all of the tiniest little locations that existed in Breath of the Wild are still here. I had so much fun going to all of my favorite little hideaways from Breath of the Wild and seeing if they still existed, and, with few exceptions, they sure did. My favorite spot was always this peaceful little valley behind the southern of the dueling peaks called Tobio's Hollow, and it was still there. A bit busier and worse for the wear, but still present. This enormous game still has so much potential for a breath, for a smidge of restrained tranquility. That all exists. But boy oh boy, does it also have a ton of new stuff in it. Because this game still has all of the Koroks and shrines that the last game had. More actually, with 1,000 Koroks and 152 shrines. But each and every one of those Koroks and shrines is in a different place than they were in Breath of the Wild. That doesn't mean that they're in more obscure places or that they feel any worse. No, almost all of these new locations feel like great places for those little surprises, meaning that the map of Hyrule, which felt so full in Breath of the Wild, had over 1,000 hiding places, big and small, that went unused, just begging for a secret to be stashed there. Now, all of this secret hiding and reward seeking is great, but none of that is ruined by fast travel. No, in order to get to the real success of the game, we have to look at the intrinsic side of traversal, and it's this. Moving around the world is fun. More than The Witcher 3, more than Skyrim, more than any other game this side of the Outer Wilds. The process of getting from place to place in Tears of the Kingdom is just so much fun. All of the traversal methods of Breath of the Wild are still here, with the exception of the motorcycle, I guess, but running, climbing, gliding, riding horses, all of that is still here. But now there's so much more, because you can build your own vehicles. You can build hovercrafts and planes and cars and motorcycles too if you're so inclined. You can carry around the resources so that at any moment you can drop them on the ground and assemble them into a new way to get around the world. Or you can just summon them from the ether, piecing together a bespoke vehicle to overcome any challenge that you may face at any time. This just adds to that intrinsic joy of moving around this world. Sure, you've climbed up to Hebra's peak several times with your hands and feet already. That's old news. But have you made it up there with a literal airship? There were a few rafts in Breath of the Wild, here and there along bodies of water that you could push with a Korok leaf if you happened to find one lying around. But what about building a raft on the spot to get across a river you forgot about? This is the joy of traversal in this game. For the first 30 hours of this game, I was never inclined to hit the fast travel button. This wasn't just because I hadn't unlocked very many useful points, and it wasn't just because my exploration was locked to a small part of the eastern half of Hyrule. It was because if I ever wanted to be in a place, I equally wanted to traverse the land and see what was around. I had this really interesting realization while I was gliding around the Akala region. I was aiming for a shrine, all of which now have this really cool visual swirl that makes spotting them much easier, certainly an extremely purposeful change and what I resonate with greatly. When I noticed I was running out of stamina, gliding isn't all that fast in the grand scheme of things, really only beating walking in speed because it allows you to travel straight between points. I had a couple of stamina refill meals in my bag, so I briefly considered taking one of those to finish my flight, but I didn't want to do that. why? Well, after I landed and began walking around, I figured it wasn't because of the scarcity of stamina regeneration ingredients. I had 50 or so stam bulbs, so there was no way I'd run short of those. It wasn't for a lack of time. Time pressure always exists in my life, but I had cordoned off those feelings in order to enjoy the world and the game. No, it was because I wanted to see what the ground held, what was waiting for me on the path from where I was to where I needed to be. And there was so much. New resources, Koroks, a few mob camps that gave me better weapons and ingredients, some ruins, and even a chasm. Landing on the ground and realizing that I did that not because I had to, but because I wanted to, was one of the most surreal realizations of all of my time playing video games. I have 765 hours in Breath of the Wild. I know the map of Hyrule like I know the map of my childhood neighborhood. I knew the major terrain I was going to be working through. What I didn't realize is just how great the differences would be in the new game. And look, that's just scratching the surface, literally. Because as much fun as seeing how the map of Hyrule I loved so much had changed and evolved was, that's not even half the game here. There are 2 more maps to explore, one that I knew existed, and one that was a genuine and utter shock. I thought that Breath of the Wild had a focus on the verticality of its world. I thought that the Hyrule of the previous game was deep and vast in every direction. I was mistaken. Tears of the Kingdom doesn't have just one Hyrule. It doesn't just have 2. It has 3. 3 maps, 3 worlds, Low-Rule, Mid-Rule, Hyrule. All here, all rich and packed and full of explorable regions and secrets. I think that had this game just been the differences seen on the surface of the world, that may have been enough for a sequel, especially if there was a compelling narrative reason for these changes that could have been a neat change. Add to it the floating islands, which have far less area to explore than the surface, but make up for that by requiring creative methods of travel between them and a wealth of challenges to complement that, and that definitely would have been enough. In fact, having you start off on the Great Sky Island gives a lot more context and meaning to the idea that you're trapped in the starter area. In Breath of the Wild, you were stuck on the Great Plateau until you completed the tutorial. But that always felt pretty arbitrary, since Link definitely had the tools and stamina to survive the drop off the edge and back to Hyrule. The mountain that you had to climb in the tutorial was much taller than the walls of the plateau, after all. But here, on this island, it makes sense that you're stuck. You aren't a few hundred feet up on a hill with a full wall stretching down that you've been trained to climb. No, you're stranded on an island, floating thousands of feet in the air, so far that you can barely see the earth beneath you, never mind a safe place to land, if such a thing even exists. Some weird ghost guy is guiding you around and you're listening because what else are you gonna do, ignore him and risk the jump? Well, maybe, but when that goes wrong, it makes sense. You can't survive that jump, obviously. You'll splat on the ground and die. So instead, you tour the Sky Island and learn about all the new tools at your disposal. We'll talk about the ruins in a different section, but you also learn how to create boats and minecarts and tracks for travel. You learn that creating machines to move you from place to place isn't just fun, but is a required piece of your toolkit in playing this game. Once you're learned and the tools at your disposal, you're directed to a place where you can safely jump off the island, learn how to glide and dive, which by the way is one of the most purely fun things you can do in this game, and safely splash down back onto the ground of Hyrule. You then use those tools that you have at your disposal to navigate the new world on the surface while scouting locations in the sky. And as you discover each new region of the world, you gain access to the new parts of the sky that you can see. You can fling yourself up there with towers or create a flying machine to chart the skies. You'll remember this flowchart of exploration and discovery that I had created for Breath of the Wild. This is the way that exploration is nailed, nearly perfected in that game. In Tears of the Kingdom, this flowchart is as alive and important as ever. There's so much more newness in this game, more than I could have possibly imagined before playing the game, that this process isn't disturbed even a little bit. But importantly, the step of traversal is slightly different. In certain cases, it isn't just a choice, but also a challenge. We're not going to go too deep into the shrine puzzles for this section, but there's a certain variation that I want to talk about since it so gloriously highlights how traversal can be both an option and a challenge. See, as you're poking around the sky regions, you'll see these empty shrine rings. Interacting with them will draw a laser to point at a crystal somewhere in the world. The challenge then is to go to the crystal, grab it, and bring it back to the shrine. This is traversal as a challenge. It's always easy enough to get Link to any particular place, but that's not enough, because he has to bring something back. He has to use the tools available to him, all of the tools, and figure out how to get back. There's no one right answer, it's all up to you. These 2 layers of Hyrule are rich in discoveries and explorability. These 2 regions alone are enough for this game to be incredible. New caves on the surface only add to this. I really hate how these new caves, as well as many other regions and locations, broadcast on your screen as a big discovery, but that's not the fault of the world. The world has all these hidden caves and dens and all sorts of hidden locations, and the Sky Islands only add more to that loop. There's more things to see and observe, more ways to traverse the land and the sky, and more things to discover and accomplish to conquer those locations. It's all more growth and more development of those ideas from Breath of the Wild that we can now see were just the foundation for Tears of the Kingdom. This is great. This is exactly what I was looking for in the sequel. This is what I wanted the sequel to be. And then, there's the depths. I didn't know that there was a main quest line for entering the depths. I didn't discover it until some 40 hours into the game. But the very first time I rode south out of Lookout Landing and saw a big, gaping hole in the ground with that oogly boogly creep reaching out of the deep, I knew that was a place to be avoided. That was scary. That was evil. Death lived there. That same oogly boogly had torn Hyrule Castle out of the ground. It was dangerous. Stay back, it seemed to say. Do not enter. So, obviously, I jumped in. Falling into that hole, winding around the creep's tendrils and steering clear of the walls, hearing the thrum of the music intensify as I fell. I felt that fear. It worked. Was I going to die? I kept waiting to see the ground. I eventually saw some little blue flames and some red oogly boogly tendrils, but I couldn't see the floor. I pulled out my paraglider just in case, waited a while, and eventually touched down on the ground. Well, it was probably ground, but it, like the walls and the ceiling and everything that may have been around me, was invisible, pitch black. I could see nothing. This was the most oppressive, dangerous, subtly horrifying feeling I'd had in gaming in a long time. It made me think of the slithering evils of Hollow Knight's Deep Nest or sneaking around in that old Slenderman freeware game. Horror and dangers that could kill me instantly lurked around every corner. Now, had I only looked behind me when I landed, I would have seen a big orange globe glowing as a beacon, calling me to the light like a moth to a flame. It would have lit the surrounding area for me, allowing me to traverse the depths more normally. But I didn't see that light. I guess I never looked in that direction. I did see another orange light though. In the distance, I saw the unmistakable glow of a flame, maybe a torch. Could that be the light of my salvation? So I went there. The music was creepy, I couldn't see where I was going. Vague shapes morphed out of the shadows, presenting obstacles and challenges. Maybe this was a small ledge. Maybe this was a wall that reached up to the heavens. How deep was I, really? How far was I from safety? I carefully crept towards the warmth of the fire, its glow growing closer with every trepidatious step. I could feel the danger receding as I approached, my own confidence and understanding of the depths seemingly blossoming with the flames. And then, I was attacked by a bokoblin with those oogly boogly tendrils all around its body. See, that torch wasn't safe. No, the light was a ruse. It was a trap designed to entice me, to lure me in, so that I could be devoured by the creatures that hid around it, blending into the darkness, invisible. I ran away, but I could hear them following me. I was low on health, very low, so I went into my pack and ate some of my, at the time, scarce food. I knew I could keep myself alive for a little while by eating. I would grab a bite and run. I had no idea where I would run to, where safety was, but it wasn't in the light. The dark was creeping and intimidating and oppressive, but it was safer than the light. I would hide in the darkness to figure out my next move, just as soon as I healed up. I ate the food and didn't heal. I kept eating, but I wasn't healing. I had one heart, only one heart, and it wasn't going up. The depths had done something to me. Not only was I beaten and hurt, but I couldn't heal myself. I thought I was very scared going in, but at that moment, I realized just how vastly I'd underestimated the danger of the depths. I was killed by the creatures that I could only make out by the glowing red tendrils around their bodies. It was frightening, even terrifying to die this way. Not only did I have no idea how to navigate and find safety, but I had no idea if safety even existed. Never in a game had I more clearly been told to keep out of an area. Other than an actual barrier keeping me out until I accomplished some arbitrary task, this was as real, as visceral a message as there was. I needed to leave and not come back for a long, long time. I went back, of course. I steered clear of the flames this time and, unwittingly, still managed to miss the orange near that first chasm. I noticed an orange glow in the distance, but this one was different to the flame. It was more stable, more subdued. Would I follow the light again, making the same faulty assumption that I had last time? Would I be lured to the light, consequences be damned? Yup. I made my way to that orange mass of bioluminescence suspended off the ground. It turned out to be a light root, which lit up the area around it. It wasn't like a tower on the surface, though. That light wasn't vast, and it wasn't just to fill up my map. That light was everything I could see, the only things I could see, and it was a very small region. I could run from that central light route to the edges of the area in just a few seconds. To explore more, I'd have to venture back into that darkness. Throughout the beginning of my playthrough, I spent about 3 hours on the Great Sky Island. I spent maybe 30 minutes on the surface of Hyrule, and once I jumped into that chasm south of Lookout Landing, I spent the next dozen hours in the depths. It was scary and mean, and I couldn't get enough. I discovered that I had a few tools at my disposal. Bright bloom seeds could be struck to light a modest area around me. Veins of a mysterious mineral would also softly glow. Zones of dangerous oogly boogly would radiate a visible red danger, as would those creatures infected with it. I had some tools to work through the depths, and I would use every one available to me. I had to, or I would die. I did die, of course. Many times I overestimated my skills and underestimated the threats of this underworld. Deaths weren't just a setback, though. They were an opportunity for me to learn and appreciate the world at a higher level. I learned that the damage done to me by the oogly boogly couldn't be healed unless I was standing under a light root. I discovered the Frox, a dangerous boss that killed me instantly. I gathered Poe and Zonite and carefully staked out my paths. I unlocked more light roots, lighting more of this world and growing to understand it, while still being left, literally and figuratively, almost entirely in the dark. Wandering around the depths, discovering this area and exploring it is the best part of Tears of the Kingdom. The world of Hyrule is so vastly improved above the surface, already so much better than the Hyrule of Breath of the Wild. Before I even noticed a chasm, I knew the world was better. But upon discovering the depths, my grasp on what the world was slipped away. I knew nothing before sinking into the ground. I think that if I described all of this to someone that hadn't played either Tears of the Kingdom or its prequel, they'd probably imagine the worlds existing as 3 separate entities, like the sky in Skyward Sword. Each of the maps exist on their own, each has hidden secrets and locations, but sometimes you can't get straight there using one, so you'd have to find an entrance in another map. Sure, they're all connected, but they're connected using a select set of specific gateways to funnel all exploration through a few linear choke points. Totally understandable, and totally wrong. The 3 maps of Hyrule don't each exist in a vacuum. Each one was carefully designed with the existence of the others in mind, and each one has tools and locations and objects that guide you to more locations and tools in other places. Let me show you an example of what I mean by taking you on another journey of mine. After finally emerging from the depths, I decided to make my way over to the Zora's Domain. It was intended to be the first area of Breath of the Wild, and even though it definitely wasn't the first prescribed region for Tears of the Kingdom, I still wanted to go there first. So I poked around, started the main story quest, then found this. It's an old map. It marked the location of a secret on my map. It opened the map and put an X where a treasure was hiding. In this case, the X was placed here, in a location that I had not been to that looked like it was an empty spot in the depths. Now, with the spot being in the depths, I knew that the journey there would be challenging and dangerous, but that just made it all the more exciting for me. I was excited to dive back in and to find this treasure. So I checked my map for the nearest chasm, and did just that. I explored the area underground, finding light routes and mapping the depths to find a path over to the mark on the map, but I couldn't. I found myself using and mastering all of those little Zonai machine octagons, which I started referring to as crafting stations, to create those bespoke vehicles for overcoming specific obstacles and better navigating the darkness. I eventually lit the entire eastern shoreline area of the depths and saw that the little X was on one of 4 islands, disconnected from the rest of the depths. I couldn't get to it from where I was. I had to find another way there, a chasm on the islands. Now, most of the main chasms are visible on the surface map. They're pretty easy to spot, since they glow that same oogly boogly red against the map's typical cyan and brown. I looked for one on any of those 4 islands, but I couldn't see one. I hadn't yet encountered a chasm that wasn't visible on the map, so I got all excited here. I had to comb the islands and find a hidden chasm, sneaking into the depths from some hidden cave. I started by scouting the islands from above, going to the sky and creating a flying machine to see if I could spot the chasm from the air. No dice, so I landed on the southernmost of the 4 islands, right above the X on the map, and began looking into every crack and crevice, hoping to find a smashable wall to break into. And on the last island, I did just that. There was a cave on that northern island, Tingle Island, that held a chasm. It felt like a genuine discovery, like a real reward. But even that wasn't the end, because I had to make my way back south. More danger, more exploration, using my tools and my brain to get to that final goal. The reward wasn't even the point. It was a pretty cool piece of kit, a nice little throwback that I definitely enjoyed having found, but it wasn't the value of the reward that made the journey worthwhile. It was moving between the 3 maps and the worlds together as one and finding rewarding reasons to explore. The world expanding from exploration, and exploration being the reward. With a game this big and open and cool, there's nothing I want more than to dive into it, literally and metaphorically, at every opportunity. Those old map rewards are perfect for this, and just highlight how these 3 maps are all part of one big, beautiful world. So take a moment to revel in all of this positivity, and don't underscore just how positive the world is in this game. In fact, let's just cut to the chase. On our new report card for Tears of the Kingdom, the world gets an A+. I wish I could give it a higher grade to show just how improved it is from Breath of the Wild, because as breathtaking as that world was, it was nothing compared to this one. The world remains the best part of Tears of the Kingdom. If you're looking for that praise and that praise alone, then you're good to go. Seriously, you can just hit that subscribe button and wait for the next chapter to be released if you want. The rest of this video will probably seem nitpicky to most people, but those nitpicks do exist, and calling them nitpicks might be underselling them because, as a direct sequel to the last game, there's something missing from the world. 4 somethings, as a matter of fact, that are emblematic of a much larger problem with the world and this game's place as a sequel. If you're still here, then you probably already know what those 4 things are. I don't have to spell it out, but I will, because their absence drove me absolutely batty while playing this game. It boils down to a single question. Where are the divine beasts? This probably won't surprise anyone who's watched any of the other videos on my channel, but I was keeping a document for notes while I played this game. Surprise, surprise, that document is now 9,000 words long. I have so much to say about this game because there's so much new and different in it, but the single phrase that appears the most in that document is the phrase, "Where are the divine beasts?" It became a shorthand for me. It means that there are landmarks, huge landmarks, some of the defining skyline features of Breath of the Wild that are simply gone. The divine beasts, the Sheikah Towers, the shrines, they're gone now. All of that progression and plot elements of the previous game, everything that Link accomplished in the last game, all of it is gone now. Not inaccessible, not relocated, gone. As I did when I played Breath of the Wild, I found myself looking off to the horizon many times during Tears of the Kingdom. And honestly, the vistas are just as impressive, even more so sometimes. The entire world of Tears of the Kingdom is awash with color and life in a way that Breath of the Wild sometimes lacked. It's not that the older game was dull in any way. I think subdued is the best way to describe it, but this new game is so breathtaking in its color. The different elevations use different palettes, and when they clash, those palettes bleed into each other. It's great, it's always interesting to look at, but the skylines feel just a bit emptier without the beasts. I'm gonna do my best to steer clear of the story implications of the missing beasts for now, though we will eventually get to it. But all of the ancient Sheikah tech from the last game is now gone. The divine beasts are gone, and the places where they rested at the end of Breath of the Wild are now just sort of empty. Same with the Sheikah monk shrines. Wherever they once were is now replaced with just empty space. This is really obvious in some of the settlements, which each contained a bespoke central display for those shrines to exist as fast travel points and, in-world, as places of wonder. Those are now empty. The new Zonai shrines that serve that same purpose are haphazardly shoved into whichever corner of those settlements is the least inconvenient to the design. Here, look at Zora's Domain for a really good example of this. In Breath of the Wild, the shrine was in the middle of a small artificial pond right off the central plaza of the settlement. It was easy to access, played a key role of visual balance in the domain's design as a giant sculpture, and was a very convenient point of fast travel. But now, in Tears of the Kingdom, it's just empty. In the middle of this bustling town, one where space is already a real luxury due to the fixed size of the sculpture, it's just a pond. There's a little more wildlife living there, which is sort of neat, I guess, but it's really bizarre. Made weirder by the fact that the new Zonai shrine isn't even in the town. No, it's on an awkward sandbar far beneath it, necessitating a long ladder climb or ascend to reach the main plaza. But this extends even further than the towns and the shrines, because all of those hundreds, maybe even thousands of guardian corpses that had been littered across the kingdom are also gone. This felt the weirdest to me outside of Fort Hateno. For most players of Breath of the Wild, this was probably one of the first locations that they would see so many Guardian corpses after the handful on the Great Plateau. Seeing hundreds of those discarded robots after learning just how dangerous they were when active gives this place a lot of character. This fort, this location, had a lot of purpose, and exploring it was rewarding. There's not a single Guardian corpse left here. In fact, throughout the entire world of Tears of the Kingdom, there's exactly one Guardian corpse left. It's here, built into the roof of Purah and Robbie's lab in Hateno Village. There's a lot of character and implicit storytelling lost with the displacement of all these devices. Again, we're not going to discuss the deeper storytelling implications yet, but the divine beasts and the shrines and the guardians are all devices that were built to stand the test of time. And they did, for at least 10,000 years, and now they're gone. What I really wished for was to see a place in each of the 4 regions where the divine beasts were resting, powered off but there, ready to spring into action should they ever be required to do so. I mean, these are city-sized robots that could be seen from across the world. What, did the Gerudo put their 2,000-foot camel back in the garage? Maybe this feels like nitpicking to you. Heck, this is pretty much the definition of nitpicking. But in that flowchart of exploration, the missing divine beasts are an observation that one could make. I did. One of the first things I noticed in my last Breath of the Wild playthrough was a divine beast. So this time, once I got fired out of that first Skyview Tower and Lookout Landing, I searched for the beasts. I figured they likely wouldn't play a huge story role, but they would certainly make for interesting set pieces. And when I didn't see that giant elephant sat next to Zora's domain or the big bird perched atop Burrito Village, I was determined to figure out why. But when I eventually climbed out of the depths and went to learn what happened, I got no answers. It was like they never existed, and that's a real shame. I observed, I traversed, but there was no conquering to be done, because the observation I made was something that did not exist. It was kind of disheartening in a way. Let's briefly touch on one more complaint before finishing up here. I hate fast travel in games. We talked about why feeling incentivized to fast travel hurts open world gameplay, and Tears of the Kingdom does a great job of avoiding that by making traversal so fun. But as the game goes on and discovery becomes less constant and overwhelming, you do start to value the ability to zip from place to place a little faster. Fast travel being an option as the game goes on is difficult to argue against from a practical perspective, so I won't ever hold that against a game too much. Now, what I will hold against a game is fast travel being mandatory at any point. I consider regions and games that aren't accessible through any other method than fast travel to be cardinal sins of open world game design. I'm not talking about open worlds that include some nested sub-regions like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Mesagoza City and the other, more spoilery cordoned off area in the world are separate from the main world, but they're accessible through a select number of specified entrances. They're separate for technical loading reasons, and entering them isn't functionally different from a fast travel point that links just those 2 regions, but being contextualized in the world solves this for me. No, I'm talking about things like The Witcher 3's continent regions being totally disconnected from each other until you obtain the fast travel point to get there. In an open world game where exploration is the gameplay, then not contextualizing how separate regions are connected takes the wind out of everything. Tears of the Kingdom doesn't do this, but it comes really dangerously close. It's always easy enough to descend in elevation. You can jump off the sky islands at any point and skydive down to the surface, which, as I said, is just stupid fun. Chasms are common, so you can dive down into the depths pretty frequently too. But ascending back out of the depths, or going back to the sky, is much more challenging. At first, I thought it was impossible to leave the depths without fast travel. The chasms are huge and deep, so flying some machine carefully back up is impractical to the point that I never even tried. I suppose it's technically possible with enough charges and patience, but it shouldn't be done. You could glide up on the winds created by the dragons going up and down, which is one of the most incredibly breathtaking discoveries to make and a feature that had my jaw on the floor. But that's not really reliable. No, I thought fast travel was your only real way out. Eventually, I did discover a handful of these huge pillar towers that sit around the depths at various points. These are the way that you leave the depths. You can use ascend through these to make it back to the main world, which is a neat touch, but these are pretty rare, and you can't use ascend at any other location, so it's pretty limiting. I really wish you could have used ascend at the light routes. That would have solved this problem single-handedly, but as it is, it's still pretty restricting. Going to the sky is a bit easier, though not much. much. You can always take some flying machine up to the Sky Islands, and you can even carry around the Zonai parts and resources to build one at any moment. It's still time consuming and tricky though, so I do wish that there was another way. The Zora quest line giving you the chest plate to climb waterfalls could have actually been a decent answer to this if it was properly implemented. Lots of Sky Islands feature some body of water, and several of them have waterfalls that pour off the side. But those waterfalls kind of just vanish into thin air before hitting the ground. Why not have them reach the surface? This would give you lots of places to climb back up to the Sky Islands. Make the waterfall climbing mechanic something that's just part of Ascend instead of having it be something that you receive during a story mission, and this would be an excellent addition. Okay, that's it for the bad stuff. And honestly, it's really not that big. It doesn't really hinder the world in any way. That's why I felt comfortable grading the world before even talking about the negatives. But I don't want to leave out how. As incredible as this world is, as well as it was considered and as amazing as exploring all of this was even after spending close to 800 hours in the previous rendition of it, the flaws are still real. I wish I could keep going. There's so many things, both big and small, that are either new features of the world or mechanics that add to Breath of the Wild's Hyrule in ways that feel both obvious and incredible. There are tiny new camp settlements of people that are dotted everywhere, making new discoveries common and giving the peoples of Hyrule a lot more chances to shine. Oh, and the sticky elixirs? Rain was a hair-pulling frustration in Breath of the Wild for making climbing almost impossible, and having a way to circumvent that is just phenomenal. And the way that the depths are like an imperfect copy of the surface, meaning that you can study the land above to try and learn a little bit about what lies below, it's so clever. And on and on and on I could go. But I do need to move on at some point, and this is where I do that. But know that everything I've touched on here, all the detailed examples and journeys I took you on, are a tiny fraction of what this world has to offer. The world is enormous and beautiful, and I couldn't get enough of it. I still can't. I'll be exploring this version of Hyrule for years to come, and I can't wait to dive back into it. Yep, A+ for the world and Tears of the Kingdom. There really wasn't any other option, now was there? Thanks so much for watching. We'll be tackling combat in the next chapter, so be sure to hit the subscribe button for that. Reception to the first part of this series was so glowing, and it gave me a lot of motivation to keep going, to make this series as great as possible. Thank you all for that. I hope it continues to live up to all of your expectations, and that you continue to enjoy what I put out. Also, thanks to the people you see on screen here. This video would not be possible without any of them. Alright, back to the lab for me. Chapter 2 should be out in 2 weeks, so stay tuned. But that's all I've got for today, so enjoy your day and take care.